How's everyone doing today? Let me get logged into my account here so I can see the chat board. We got 3 logged in already, so I'm going to wait a little bit of time here, let more people log in here and turn off my sound. DMC, good morning there, my friend. Oh wow, lost us. He's finally logging in from the other side of the pond. Yo, didn't miss this one. That's awesome. Nice to have you on board. I'm going to wait a little bit longer here, let some more people log in. We're also doing another giveaway during the last part 4. We did a Elfster's Rifles and Reloading t-shirt giveaway. And we're doing another giveaway, but switching it up a little bit. And in order for you to win this giveaway, you got to make sure you keep on watching. You don't miss any part of this episode. And somewhere along the line, I'm not going to tell you when and where, at least where right here, but when, I'm going to do this giveaway where you guys can win some stuff here. So I'm going to wait a little bit longer. Let some more people log in so they don't miss anything. So sitting in the outback watching this, that's awesome. Where in Australia are you from there? Oh, Saucy, I'm just curious. So I'm gonna wait a little bit longer here, let some more people log in. So if you're just joining us, we are doing another giveaway here, and I got some pretty spectacular prizes that you guys can choose from. It's just not just going to be one. I'm going to let you choose here which you guys want to win here if you actually are the winner. So I guess while we're waiting for more people to log in, figured I'd just go over what we've done so far in the previous 4 parts to get us up to this point. So what have we done so far? We've sorted through 1,000 pieces of Lake City brass. We picked out 200 pieces. We checked for dings in the side of the case body, crushed mouse. We decapped that. We took it through its first round of cleaning, clean enough to size, anneal, you name it. So it's really important to get that clean right after that decapping that we did in part 1. Also giving those primer pockets more of a chance to get cleaned. We swaged and ramed those primer pockets, which you only need to do on the first go around with this Lake City brass. Once you've fired those reloads again, you don't have to do it again. So that's saving you a big step there. We uniform those primer pockets. So like I said, again, once you uniform it, you usually don't need to do it again. We annealed. For me personally, I like to anneal every single time, regardless of the cartridge. In this case, if you're new to this live stream event, we're doing 223 with Lake City brass. In this last part 4, we went over headspace. In my opinion, that's probably the most crucial, most important part of the reloading process, especially if you want precision ammunition, consistent headspace. Not only is it safe, but it produces consistent ammunition for precision rifle rounds. That's really important. After we went over headspace, we lubed that brass and we sized that brass. And I showed you how to get a consistent headspace bump by running your press with a consistent pull of that handle and the ram. That's super important. And then we got that brass in its second and final wash to get that lube off the brass. So, see, you're Lost Aussies near Broken Hill. Okay, not exactly sure where that is, but nice to know. So I'm just going to wait a little bit longer here before we start. And if you happen to miss this live event, I always upload these live events for you guys so you can watch them at your own leisure. So So what are we doing here? So the giveaway. So later in this episode, we're going to be doing a giveaway. So I'm going to just quick go over what you guys can win. And man, if right now we only got 4 watching, so you got a damn good chance of winning. So maybe it's because it's Sunday, who knows? But I think more guys will log in as time goes by. But let me just quick go over what you can win. So you get to choose. You don't get them all. You get to choose one of these. So the first one would be 300. Oh, by the way, if you're outside the 48 states, you might have to pay additional shipping, especially for you that are lost Aussie, man. I don't know what the shipping would be on that, but just keep that in mind. If it's got to go over the pond, it might cost a little shipping. But at least you get the product for free. But the first prize here is roughly 300 pieces of 224 55 grain full metal jacket with a cantilever. It's got a boat tail on it. And I'm also, with that, you're getting a Gerber ceramic pocket knife sharpener. So that's the first prize that you can win here. We're also got some Hornady, a full box. I don't know what happened to my computer here. Got some technical difficulties here. Just give me a second. And make sure this is still live streaming. Looks like it still is. I might have to get my back up here. Sometimes this laptop doesn't want to run all the time. That's for darn sure. I apologize here, guys. Let me see what's going on here with my streaming. Let's give the latecomers more chance to log in here so they can make sure they win some prizes. Well, at least you know it's live. Not sure what happened there. My laptop decided it was just going to shut off. So at least you know it's live. So sorry about that. Apologize. I just want to make sure I got your comments up here and I can see how it looks on the screen. So if you're just joining us, we're doing a giveaway. First prize here is 300 pieces of Hornady 224 55 grain full metal jacket with a boat tail on a cantilever and a Gerber knife sharpener. We also have some VMAX Hornady 100 pieces, brand new box, 6mm or 243 87 grain VMAX. Third prize here you can choose from is a 6.5. If you got a 6.5 Creedmoor, it's an amazing bullet here in the AMAX, 100 pieces, 140 grain AMAX 6.5. And we have some Hornady Match 168 grain boat tail hollow points. I use these in my Tika T3X CTR and they perform amazing. So and also is you could choose this too. It's a Grove Tech. It's a single point bungee sling. And yeah, so that's what you get to choose from. So in order to win, you got to make sure you make those comments or ask a question. And somewhere around in this part of the series, I am going to do a random number from 0 to 10,000. I'll let you know when to make those numbers be known. So let me read some of your questions and comments here. Kowski, hey Elfster, nice to see you log in there, buddy. Richard, so yeah, looks good here, guys. Keep on making those comments. What DMC? Speaking of annealing, what do you expect for longevity with a anneal ease machine? I was thinking the drive wheel might be consumable. Blah blah blah. So yeah, DMC. I see the longevity of the anneal ease being a spectacular machine, a 100% solid purchase for $275. Highly recommend that machine if you don't want to make your own of the do-it-yourself machine that I have listed on my YouTube channel. And yeah, I would have no issues telling my best friend to buy that machine, especially 275 bucks. And you know, I suppose there is a chance if you did thousands of rounds, there's a chance you might have to replace some of those wheels. But that's what Jeff Buck at Nails Lee's is there for. He stands behind his product, and I know he'll get you situated. And you can actually buy the wheels separately too. So, yeah, but so if you guys got any questions on these prizes, just let me know. Before we get going here, one of the prizes you can win is the Grove Tech single point bungee sling. And I just want to let you guys know I'm a big supporter of firearm and companies that make accessories for firearms, especially like Grove Tech. And I like supporting these companies, especially when, number one, they're made in the USA, and also when these products are made by American workers and they make an amazing product. And I just got these. I'm about to test them out myself, but initially these products look really heavy duty. The stitching looks amazing on the sling, and they make an assortment of accessories, you know, from slings, swivel sets, holsters, Picatinny rails and adapters, thread protectors. You know, I actually got a QD mount here with a bipod adapter that I plan on putting on that PSA AKP in 7.62 by 39 new firearm series that's coming out here soon, probably in the next 2 weeks, I'm guessing, right after the PSA AKV in 9mm. So yeah, do me a favor, check out their website, Grove Tech, amazing company, made in the USA by workers that work in the United States, and let's get those guys supported. So let's get going here. Looks like we got some people logged in, and no spinning the wheels. So where are we at here? Now, number one rule, especially in this part, regardless of whatever parts we're talking about, but especially in this part, make sure you got these bad boys on, your safety glasses. I can't stress that enough. Every time you're in the reloading room, make sure you got your safety glasses on, especially if you're trimming brass. Those brass filings, they go flying all over the place, and the last thing you want is one of those going in your eye. And trust me, that's happened to me before, and it laid me up for over a day and scratched my eyeball, and it was terrible. So make sure you got those safety glasses on. So what are we doing today? So today, part 4, we sized, and we had to get that lube off. We cleaned it, and before you proceed with this next step, obviously make sure your brass is 100% dry. The last thing you want is the smallest amount of moisture in those primer pockets. Make sure your brass is 100% dry, and I don't care what you have to do to make sure it's dry. If you have to put in a dehydrator, something like a Lyman Cyclone brass dryer, which is pretty much a glorified dehydrator, and a lot of guys just use, you know, regular dehydrators, or I use sometimes my air hose, or just leave it on your bench for 2 or 3 days. But most important thing is make sure that brass is dry. So that's super important. So now we are going to trim this brass, and we're going to chamfer and debur, and it's depending on the method that you use to trim your brass. Sometimes you don't have to chamfer debur right away, which I'm going to go over here in a little bit, especially with like the ground trimmers, they kind of do it all in one. So it really depends on the method to your madness and your method of trimming your brass, whether you need to chamfer and debur. But I'm going to go over that here in a little bit. And then we're eventually going to get to seating primers. So that's what we are doing today. So let's get right to it with trimming. Now, personally, when it comes to trimming, I use the world's finest trimmers. This is kind of what I started out with, and I'm still using them today. And I've said this before in the other parts, and I'll say it again. Do not buy a kit. You absolutely, at a minimum, buy the world's finest trimmer. You do not want to do trimming by hand. And I know some guys that do. You know, if you're only doing, 10, 20 pieces, so be it. But most guys I know minimum doing 50, 100 pieces at a shot, especially like me. And you do not want to do it by hand. Trust me, you're going to have arthritis. And by the time you walk out of your reloading room, you're not going to be able to move your hands. So at a minimum, I would get the world's finest trimmers. I'm going to show you some different brands here. So some trimmers that I would recommend right out of the gate, and regardless if you can afford it or not, if you got to wait a little bit of time and save up some money, I would highly recommend getting these trimmers. Like I said, you do not want to do this by hand. I always say, buy what you can afford, but in this situation, you're really at a minimum get the world's finest trimmers. But if you can afford it, I think the world's finest trimmers, they usually go for about 60, 70 bucks. The tri-way trimmer from Grout, is probably the best bang for your buck trimmer you can get. The reason why I say that is not only does it trim your brass, but it also a one-shot chamfers the outside and inside of the case mouth. And that's one less step that you have to do. For example, like this Lyman Case Prep Center, if you use a world's finest trimmer, all this thing does is trim. That's all it does. It just trims, but it doesn't chamfer the inside of the case mouth, and it doesn't debur the outside of the case mouth. So by spending a little bit extra money, even if you can't afford it, maybe wait a little bit, save some extra money, and buy this tri-way trimmer, and it is well worth it. And if you want the best of the best, it's probably going to be this. The Grout trimmer itself, it's got different inserts depending on what cartridge you're doing. This is probably the best of the best, but it's also $500 awesome. So, and that's just starting out. Once you add in these little accessories, it can go well north of 500 bucks. And it also depends on the machine that you're using. For example, if you have like a Dillon progressive press, they have some trimmers that will attach directly to, for example, like a Dillon 1050. If you progressively want to trim your brass, this is starting out at roughly 370 bucks. But there is the good old trusty world's finest trimmer, and that's what I started out with, and that's still what I'm using. And usually you can get these for about 40, 50 bucks at a really good deal, really good sale. Typically I would say about 60, maybe 70 bucks. Really depends on the cartridge that you're trimming. And in regards to the world's finest trimmers, is an absolute minimum trimmer to use. You pretty much, you're going to want to buy one world's finest trimmer for that one single cartridge. If you're reloading 223, you're going to have a specific trimmer based on that cartridge. And they have other ones. For example, I have one for 6.5 Creedmoor. I take this out of the box here. So very identical in shape and size, just different cartridge. But I also have one in 308, and I actually have a 243 rifle too. And being that the 243 brass cartridge is kind of in the same family as the 308, it's the same diameter base, somewhat the same body, it's just necked differently. You can actually use this 308 world's finest trimmer for 243. You just need to reset it all the time. So if you're going back and forth from 243 to 308, you have to reset this trimmer. And it could kind of be a pain in the butt. But one little trick that you can do to save time is you can make a dummy round based off your cartridge headspace, 1 in 308 and 1 in 243, and put it in the box with that trimmer. And you can undo these Allen screws here and adjust this, put in that dummy round, and bring this trimmer back down till it touches the case body, and lock that back down. I usually will get it really darn close for trimming between 243 and 308. But man, there are so many different types of trimmers out there now, especially not like back in the day when I first started. You only had a few options, and since the world's finest trimmer came out, the amount of trimmers have just exploded. You know, for example, they got the Lyman Trim Express. You know, it's got different inserts. But if I was to give you a suggestion, and regardless if you can afford it or not, just get the Tri-Way. Just be done with it. And what's nice about this thing is not only does it trim, but it chamfers the inside and outside of the case mouth opening, so you don't have to use this, or at least this part of the deburring and chamfering of the inside of the case mouth opening. So the more steps you can save in this process, the more time it's going to save you. So enough of that. Let's keep on moving on here today. So I said this before, and I'll say it again, is before we do anything, make sure you test that battery in your calipers. Make sure that battery is fresh. Like I said before, in part 4, I have this little piece of 223 brass. I know for a fact this thing is 1.750. You know, my calipers are zeroed out here, so we're just going to double check this, and it is right there, 1.750. So I know my battery's fresh and my calipers are accurate. So let me read some of your questions and comments here before we continue. DMC, you bet, no problem on the assessment on the Neil E's. So Vladia, good morning to you too. Oh man, Michael Knisely's rolling into the house. Am I late? Yeah, you're late. Now don't get me all dyslexic on this WFT. Next thing you know, I'll be calling it a WTF. That's not good. So do you guys have any questions on trimming before we proceed here? Does everything look good? Feeds good? Sounds good? Just let me know. All right, so trimming the brass. So I went over the different types of brass trimmers and brands. Obviously, ultimate decision's up to you, but like I said, if you're starting and you're new, get that Tri-Way. I think that's the best trimmer for the money right now, and it's usually about $105 right now for that Tri-Way. So now, why do you trim? First and foremost, the main reason why you trim is you want to make sure that piece of brass is in spec. If you load a piece of brass in your chamber, especially this Lake City brass, that's had to been, the headspace had to be bumped considerably. When you size that brass will grow, and that brass needs to go somewhere. For example, if you guys have been watching this series, we had 10,000 pieces of Lake City brass that was not fired out of my farm. This was fired out of M16 with a tremendous headspace. And we had to bump that brass back considerably. And especially when you bump brass back considerably, the overall length of the brass will grow considerably. And as for example, in this 223, let me bring up a spec page here for you guys. I don't know if you guys can make this out or not, but for 223, maximum case length is 1.760. And most of your reloading manuals, for example, like this Hornady manual or Sierra, they got their own manuals. Usually I bookmark mine with a little piece of blue tape here for 223. I can go right to it. And max case length is 1.760. You cannot go over that. If you go over that maximum case length, you bring up your comments here, and you feed that into your chamber, you're gonna destroy your chamber, especially if you do it multiple times. You are gonna destroy your chamber and it's not gonna be good. So make sure you're under maximum. So that maximum for 223 is 1.760. Now, what I recommend, most people recommend, is to trim your brass back from maximum 0.01 inches. So their maximum case length out of the Hornady manual is 1.760. You're going to want to trim that back 0.01 inches. So what they're recommending is 1.750 is their recommended trim length. So now for me personally, I go a little above what they recommend. If maximum, for example, in 223 is 1.760, and they're recommending that you trim that back 0.010 down to 1.750 or 1 3/4 of an inch, I usually like to go a little bit above that, not much. I might trim my 223 brass 1.751 to 0.1752. And actually, if you want, you can put that on your reloading information card. I actually got it right here, brass trim length 1.751 to 1.752. Now, if you can trim your brass to the exact thousandths of an inch length every single time, man, you're awesome. You're making the most consistent precision ammunition known to man, but it's typically not possible. It's going to vary a little bit, but the more that you can make your brass exact on every single piece, that means the same amount of brass that is in the neck of that rifle cartridge. And the more amount of brass in that neck, the more amount of neck tension you're going to have. And the least amount of brass in that neck, the least amount of neck tension you're going to have. And if you have differences in your overall trim length, most likely that's going to mean differences in your overall neck length, and that's going to mean differences in your neck tension. And if one piece of brass is not consistent to the next, that means this piece, if it's longer in length, is going to have more neck tension, and if this piece is shorter in length, that means it's going to have less neck tension. And this one's going to have way more pressure than this one. And if this has more pressure, that means more velocity. And that's going to impact your paper down range higher than this one. So that's why it's super important to make sure that your brass is trimmed at the same length. I keep on going back to this word consistency, and it really is all about that. It's about consistent everything, headspace, trimming, neck tension, everything. It's all very, very important. So let me read some of your comments and questions here. So you guys really aren't asking me any questions. So ask those questions, guys. That's what I'm here for. I'm here to help you guys out. So let's keep on going here. Okay, so I went over max versus actual. I want to make one point here before we actually trim this brass. There is one downfall of stainless steel cleaning, one downfall of wet stainless steel cleaning, and that is ball peening of the case mouth opening. You usually don't see this with, wet tumbling with walnut media. With wet stainless steel pin media cleaning, you are going to get ball peening of the case mouth openings. And what that is, I don't know if you guys can even make this out or not, especially with the 720p video. but that those little pins will beat up this case mouth opening just a little bit. It's like someone took a little ball peen hammer and a punch and kind of beat that case mouth opening up a little bit. That's called peening of the case mouth opening. It's one of the downfalls of stainless steel media cleaning, wet cleaning. And what I like to do every single time is I'll at least chamfer. Whether or not I trim the brass or not, I like to chamfer the inside of that case mouth opening because of that peening of the case mouth opening due to stainless steel wet tumbling. And if I trim the brass and it's got a very harsh, coarse cut on the case mouth opening, I'll have to chamfer the inside of the case mouth a little bit more because obviously it's a fresh cut on that case mouth opening. But the second time around, when I go to fire this brass again after I've reloaded this brass and shot it out of my rifle again, there's a good chance that I might not even be able to trim this brass again. It's already been trimmed, but I will just ever so slightly touch it on my Lyman Case Prep Center on the chamfer on the inside of the case mouth opening. I'm going to go over that here a little bit. But that is one of the downfalls of stainless steel cleaning. So what else do we got here? So we're going over max versus actual, and that's blah, blah, blah. So let's get going with this. I'm not going to bore you guys with all 200 pieces. I actually just pulled out 20 pieces of brass here from this series. So you guys aren't going brain dead watching me trim 200 pieces of brass. So now when it comes to the world's finest trimmers, and this kind of goes for pretty much any trimmer out there, whether or not it's the world's finest trimmer or the Tri-Way or the Lyman Case Trimmer Express, they usually are all based off the cartridge headspace. And now that you guys have watched all 4 parts of this series and you know everything there is to know about headspace, these products work off the headspace or off the datum line of the brass casing. And when I say that, when you insert this brass into the world's finest trimmer, for a pure example here, it is solely based off the headspace. It's riding off the datum line or the shoulder of the brass, and that's what sets your brass towards the cutter of the world's finest trimmer. Now, with that being said, if you have inconsistent headspace bumps on your brass from part 4, and they're all over the place, I keep on going this word, consistency. If your headspace bumps are inconsistent, your trimming is also going to be inconsistent. It's going to fall right behind that. And I can't stress this enough about learning how to run your press just right to get that consistent headspace, because if you have inconsistent headspace, you're going to have inconsistent trimming. And it's not just the world's finest trimmer, it's off that Tri-Way trimmer. It's pretty much every trimmer that's not done by hand nowadays. So it's super important to make sure you get that consistent headspace bumps. Let me see if you guys got any questions here. So with that being said, if you do want to purchase a world's finest trimmer, like I said, I always usually make a dummy round for each cartridge that I reload for. I make a dummy round for 223, 243, 6.5, and I keep that dummy round in my world's finest trimmer box in case I have to reset that for some weird reason. And it makes it really easy. You just loosen up these two Allen screws here. You just loosen that up, and there's a cutter in there. I can take this out. Once you loosen this up, this cutter will go back and forth, and you put in your dummy round, and then you move your cutter till it touches the case mouth opening of your dummy round, and then you lock these 2 Allen screws down. It really is that simple, and you might have to fine tune it just a little bit, but it will get you within reason of your actual trim length that you're going for. So before we trim this, I just want to go back over this with you guys. for this example, 223, maximum trim length is 1.760. Their recommended trim length is to trim that back 0.01 or 1.750. Like I said before, I like to personally trim my brass for 223, that is, to 1.751 to 1.752. It's impossible to get it perfect, but it's going to be somewhere in that range. And I don't like to go all the way to the very bottom, but you definitely want to stay away from that max. So a lot of guys that I know that trim 223, they will trim somewhere in that 1.750 to 1.754. That's completely up to you, whatever you want to trim your brass bracket to. But getting back to that word consistency, you got to make sure all your brass is at the same length, because if you don't, you're going to have differences in your neck tension. So let's get this going. I'm going to pop this in my cordless drill. Now, before you do this, if you are using a World's Finest trimmer or the Tri-Way, I recommend blowing this out with an air hose. This thing gets filled up, obviously, with brass filings that get cut off. And if it gets filled up with too much brass filings, it gets really dangerous. Like I said, make sure you got these safety glasses on. And those brass filings just get all over your reloading bench. And trust me, just keep it clean, and it will save you a lot of time. So now when you trim your brass, what I like to do is I like to tip my drill back with a World's Finest trimmer backwards, and when I insert my brass casing. Now, reason why is I like to try and keep the brass filings from falling into my brass. It's one less thing I got to double check, and I'm eventually going to go over that in part 6 here when we drop powder and seat bullets. Once the primers are seated, and I'll check over all my brass with a light, make sure that there's no brass filings, and even more important is to make sure there's no stainless steel pins inside your brass case. That's the last thing you want fired out of your rifle's bore. It's the quickest way to destroy your rifle's bore, is miss one single piece of stainless steel pin inside one of those case bodies when you pour in that powder, and that is not good. Not only that, the destroyer could blow up your barrel, and it could be bad. Any object that is not powder or in a bullet is not a good thing coming out of your rifle's bore. So make sure you check that out. But I will tip this back, make sure that the brass filings fall back in my World's Finest trimmer and not like this, so they're falling into my brass casing. And I'll usually spin this a little bit while I'm running my drill. And I suppose I should have measured this before and after, but this should be about 1.751 to 0.752, and you can see it's right there, 1.752. Can you guys make that out? 1.752. So I'm shooting for 1.751 to 1.752. If I keep in that range, I'm creating really consistent precision ammunition. So let's try a different one here. I'm going to measure this one before and after. Now, like I said, this is Lake City brass that we tremendously bumped. We tremendously sized that brass. I think it was, what, 1.7, what was it? Yeah, so that Lake City brass was, the headspace was 1.461 plus. I mean, it's humongous. And we bumped it clear back to 1.453. And that's a tremendous way to bump your headspace. And when you bump headspace that far back, that brass will grow. That brass has got to go somewhere, and it's not going to go towards the case body. It's going to go towards the neck and increase the overall length of that brass, and that's why trimming here is super crucial. And when you bump that brass back, that substantial, that overall length is going to be insane. Let me show you how insane this is. So remember, in this particular cartridge, 223 maximum, you can't go over that number, 1.760. 1.761. You put that in your rifle's chamber, you are going to destroy it. Let me try another one here that I haven't trimmed yet. So 761. Let's see if I can find an outrageous one here. That one's pretty reasonable. Pretty much all of these. Yeah, here's an outrageous one. You put that in your rifle's chamber because we excessively bumped that brass. And this is 1.766, 6,000th of an inch over maximum. You're going to destroy your rifle's chamber. And it is going to be the quickest way to, not only you could destroy your rifle's chamber, or even worse, because that brass is so excessively long, your rifle's chamber will crimp down. It'll almost create a crimp on that rifle neck, and it will crimp down on that bullet, and your pressures in your chamber are going to exponentially go north, and it can be dangerous. Your rifle's chamber can literally explode, and that's not good. So make sure you're trimming that brass correctly. Let me read some of your comments here. So Chikowitz, it says, world's finest trimmer, does the cutter have a life expectancy? Is the cutter replaceable? It's a good question. They do get dull, but I don't quote me on this, but I believe world's finest trimmers, they will replace your cutter for free, I think. Don't quote me on that. You just gotta send them a message and they'll get that replaced out for you, I believe. That's something you can double check with them. So AR Precision, I do 1.740 and up to 1.750, and that's acceptable. Like in that book, Horney's book, they're recommending 1.750. And you always see this with the new reloaders, man. They see in that book, man, I'm not supposed to go down 1.750 for 223. And they go down to 1.748 or something. And you can still shoot it. That's fine. I would have no problem shooting that. I've seen guys go down, and some guys will go down even excessively past that, so they never have to trim it again. And it's really up to you. It's really all about your journey. I've said this before. I'm not telling you and showing you how to reload. I'm just showing you how I reload. And I know some guys that will go down under recommended, in this case 1.750, so they never have to trim again. And usually for me in 223, especially in a semi-auto, I usually start to see split necks, usually on the 5th, 6th firing. For semi-auto, I'm usually throwing that brass away anyways after about its 5th or 6th firing. Now, bolt action is completely different. Bolt action, man, brass life can go well beyond that, especially if you're using really good Lapua brass. You know, you can see well over 10 reloads in a bolt action. And a semi-auto, usually that brass gets beat up a lot more, so its life expectancy is not the same as a bolt action. So yeah, keep those questions and comments rolling in, guys. So let's keep on trimming this brass. So double check some of this. So like I said, I like to trim my 223 brass to 751s, 752. So that looks good. I'm only going to do 20 pieces here, so I'm not completely boring you guys to death. So this is 760. You can notice I'm kind of spinning in there a little bit. Yeah, 751. I'm going to show you how consistent this world's finest trimmer is. So 760. I don't know if you guys just noticed that, but a piece of brass just went flying, and that's why you got to wear these, your safety glasses. You don't want that in your eye. So 751. 762 before we trim. 751. I'm going to show you how consistent this is. And the consistency is just not on the trimmer, it's on you guys. Like I said, it's all based off headspace. This trimmer is based off the cartridge's headspace. If your headspace is inconsistent, your trims are going to be inconsistent. Now this one is outrageous. Look at this. 1.769. That would be very bad to put in your rifle's chamber without trimming it. So So 751. So we got the 761 4 trim. So 752. Now I know some guys they'll make a little machines for these. I've actually seen guys tear apart a drill, make a little box. And they'll make their own little trimming station with the world's finest trimmer, a little do it yourself at home project. I've seen guys do that before, but like I said, if you guys can afford it, even if you can't afford it, save up some money. Just get that tri-weight trimmer. It's just the way to go. So 762. So we're at 752. That's a little over. I'm gonna keep on going. 751. So 751. Now on this initial set of brass, I would definitely check each piece. Make sure you're consistently trimming that brass. But once it's been trimmed, most likely you won't be able to trim it again. 752. And about the only time you ever see it get trimmed again if you've reloaded it maybe 2 or 3 extra times, and especially in a semi-automatic, you see a lot more semi-automatic. You're constantly bumping that brass from fire form 0.003 to 0.005. Obviously you're bumping that brass back more, and that brass length is growing, so you're going to have to trim it more, and you're going to see it less in a bolt action because you're only bumping that brass nothing to maybe 0.001 to 0.002, and you're going to see a lot more trimming, a lot more brass expansion with a semi-auto. Now, I guess while I'm on this topic of bumping brass and brass length growing, and you're trimming it off, you're probably asking the question, where is that brass going? I mean, obviously you're trimming it off. Well, eventually, if you keep on going, and you gotta learn when you need to throw that brass away. You bump the brass grows, you trim it off. You bump it again, your brass grows, you trim it off. Well, what happens is the side of your case body, that brass starts to thin, and the brass will get so thin. If you just keep on reloading that brass, you're ignoring those loose primer pockets. You're ignoring signs from your brass that the longevity of that brass is way long gone. What will happen is the side of the case body gets so thin is you can get what's called case head separation, and that is the number one worst thing that can happen in the reloading situation like this is case head separation. You've let that brass go so long that the brass will literally separate, and they call it case head separation. The head of the case is separating from the body, and it will explode. You'll definitely hear a difference when that round is expelled, or even worse, your chamber literally explodes, and it's not good. So you got to make sure you're keeping an eye on that. And when it comes to case head separation, you can kind of check for it. You can actually take a paper clip. I don't know what I did with mine. It's around here somewhere. But you can take a paper clip and bend it out straight and put just every little bit of a bend at the end of the paper clip, a 90-degree bend. And we're talking just a little bit of a bend in the paper clip. And you can insert that paper clip and scrape the inside of that brass. And if you feel any shallowness or especially an indentation in that brass, throw it away. That means it's impending case head separation. because you've reloaded it too many times. You bump the brass grows, you trim it off. You bump the brass grows, you trim it off. The sides of the case body are getting so thin that you have impending case head separation about to happen. And like I said before, I'm not telling you how to reload. I'm only showing you how I reload and my methods. But it's definitely something to keep an eye on, because it's probably the most dangerous aspect when it comes to the reloading situation like this. So let me read some of your questions and comments here. So Richie Gonzalez is asking, what's your rifle's twist rate? Most AR rifles are 1 to 7. My bolts are 1 to 9. So, you know, mine is actually a 1 to 8. I believe most ARs are 1 to 8. I just prefer a 1 to 8. It has more of a wider range of bullets, in my opinion, that you can shoot out of a 223. You know, you start hitting the 1 to 7s, you're usually pushing towards heavier bullets, heavier 223 bullets. Something like a 68 or 75 grain bolt tail hollow points. It's usually in a bolt action. You're shooting longer distances. You want a heavier bullet. Most ARs I found, I think all my ARs have a 1 and 8 twist, except for one. That would be my 10.5 inch PSA AR pistol in 5.56. It actually has a 1 and 7 twist barrel in it, which is strange. If you actually watch that series of mine with a PSA 10.5 inch AR pistol with a 1 and 7 twist, I actually did some load development and shot different bullet weights on paper, 2 5-shot groups each. And believe it or not, because of that shorter barrel length, 10.5 inch barrel length with the 1 7 twist, it typically prefers heavier bullets, 68 grain and 75 grain. The 55 grain VMAX actually destroyed. And when I say destroyed, it destroyed the 68 and 75 grain VMAX by far. You can watch that video series. Go to part 1 and part 2. You can see for yourself in my PSA 10.5 inch 5.56 AR pistol series. And I think the reason why is because it's only a 10.5 inch barrel. It doesn't have a long enough barrel length to stabilize that bullet, even with a 1 and 7 twist. It's definitely interesting. It's something to definitely check out. But to get back on trimming brass here. So your Chikowitz is asking, Elfsters, I'm sure everyone's mileage will vary, but how many times do you reload brass before it's trash or time to retire it? So kind of like when I was going back, what I was saying before, it really depends if it's semi-automatic or bolt action. Semi-automatic with 223, even my 308s or 6x5 Creedmoors, usually I'm getting about, I would say 5 tops, maybe 6. I usually don't go past 6. It's pretty rare, especially in 2-3. More times than not, you're going to see split necks. Keep an eye on those split necks while you're reloading. Obviously, throw it away if you see it. Bolt actions, man, bolt actions will just keep on going, usually well past 10 reloads. And it really depends on a couple things. The type of cartridge and how hot you reload that cartridge. It all makes a difference on that brass longevity. Now, when you're reloading for pistol ammunition, more times than not, pistol ammunition or straight wall pistol brass or even rifles, there is no neck to it. You're not bumping the neck and shoulder headspace, and it's just a straight wall. And more times than not, you don't even have to trim that. I said more times than not. Sometimes you do, but more times than not, you don't have to trim that brass. And the brass longevity on straight-walled cartridges is insane. Like pistol brass, I've seen guys reload well past 20 reloads on a pistol brass and keep on going. So it just makes a difference on if it's necked or if it's a straight wall case. It makes a difference. So let's keep on going here. I got almost half of these trimmed up, so let's finish the rest of these here. So 752, 751. 752. See if I can get a little closer here for you guys. You can see better. Seven 5.2. So 7.515. So you guys can see how consistent my trimming is, and a lot of that is due to my consistent headspace bumps and consistent head sizing. So this is 753. There's a good chance that headspace on that might be a little too long. Sometimes I'll just run it in there again. And yeah, 7515. So you want to have a consistent amount of time and pressure, the amount of pressure you're putting in here. You know, you can really push it as hard as you want in these World's Finest trimmers. It's pretty hard to screw that up, but the amount of time that you run it inside the trimmer, so you're not doing it too long, saving yourself time. 751, 752. So 7515. Consistency, name of the game here. Seven 515. That is what you call consistent trimming. So 7515. Seven 515. I mean, they are all right there. And I'm purposely doing 20 just to show you how consistent this is because of my consistent sizing. So let's just start out at 760 before it's trimmed. And trimmed length 7515. So man, that is spot on. I mean, those are exactly the same length. So let me clean off my bench here, all these little filings. Okay, so on to the next part here. Clean off my desk here a little bit. Now, I highly recommend, and I kind of say this in the other parts, is getting an anvil. It just really helps getting consistent measurements, regardless if you're measuring the overall brass length or your head spacing with your bump gauges. Just get the anvil, spend the extra money, get it right away. It's definitely well worth it. So, all right, so that's why I recommend getting the tri-way trimmer. So it takes care of the next steps all in one with the trimming. Tri-way trimmer, obviously it trims the brass, but it also puts a chamfer on the inside of the case mouth and also chamfers the outside of the case mouth. Now with the World's Finest trimmer, it does not chamfer the inside of the case mouth, and it doesn't deburr or chamfer the outside of the case mouth. So that's why I got to use my Lyman Case Prep Center with these little parts here. This part here is for deburring the outside of the case mouth opening. Why is that important? You're probably asking. Deburring the outside of the case mouth opening. If you don't have a tri-way trimmer, you're just using this or doing it by hand. Let me see if I can get closer here so you guys can see this. When you trim that brass, it has a super harsh cut. I mean, it is coarse. I mean, it is like almost like a razor around that perimeter of that case mouth opening. Let's see if I can get a little bit better view here by looking at my screen. And there is little burrs on the outside of this case mouth opening, and it is a harsh 90-degree cut, and that is not good. If you don't chamfer and deburr, you miss this step, you are instantly going to ruin the precision of your reloads. And this part here will deburr the outside of the case mouth opening. It knocks off that edge, it gets rid of those burrs. Why is that important? So when, especially in a semi-automatic, when you don't have control of the bolt and this thing is rammed home inside that chamber, if there's a burr in there, you're going to scratch the heck out of your chamber. And this step is more about protecting your chamber, your rifle's chamber, and making sure that you knock off those burrs. So the other step here, this is for chamfering the inside of the case mouth opening. Why is that important? Well, it's important because you want to make sure when you seat that bullet, that when that bullet is seated, that it doesn't rip off the copper jacket of the bullet. You gotta remember, we just did a really harsh 90-degree cut on this thing, and we need to put a small, roughly 40 to 30-degree bevel on the inside of that case mouth opening. When you seat that bullet, and accept that bullet without ripping off the copper jacket of the bullet itself. And that is super crucial, because if you miss this step and you scratch, or especially if you scrape off that copper jacket, it's going to be a deformity in your bullet. And when that bullet exits your rifle's muzzle, it's going to destroy its accuracy. And you want to keep that bullet consistent. We're going to keep on going back to that word consistency. So that's why chamfering the inside of that case mouth is very important. So let's get this going here. So I'm going to first start out with the deburring the outside of the case mouth opening. And I kind of spin mine, but it's really important to make sure you keep your brass at a straight up and down 90 degrees towards the lineman case prep center here. So by doing this, and you probably can't make this out on the video, but I just put a small little bevel on the outside, and I just knocked off those burrs off that piece of brass. And now I'm going to move on to chamfering the inside of the case mouth opening. Make sure we don't rip off that copper jacket. Now this is really important when you do this step, the inside chamfer, that this is straight as possible. And you can kind of see I'm kind of bracing my finger here, and I'm keeping this brass straight up and down as much as I possibly can. Now you probably can't make this out, and I'll see if I can get this close as possible here. I'm going to look at my screens. I can see what you guys are seeing. But there is the slightest bevel on the inside of that case mouth opening. Now, if you are doing this like I'm doing this, you're not using a tri-way trimmer, it is super, super important not to overdo this. You need to do it, but you got to make sure you don't overdo it. And it's pretty hard to overdo the outside deburring, but you can definitely and quickly overdo the inside chamfer of the case mouth opening. And if you overdo it, you're going to thin the walls of that case neck, and you're more times than not going to get a split neck just like that, just because you over chamfered. So it's super important not to overdo that. So let me read some of your questions and comments here. So Thomas TX is asking, do you chamfer the inside of your flash hole? Now that's called uniforming the flash hole, and you can definitely do it more times than not. If you're uniforming your flash hole, you're getting rid of those little burrs, and it can help with swaging and getting consistent swage, but I'm not overly driving myself crazy with getting consistent swaging. But some guys will uniform the flash hole for not only swaging, but make sure when that firing pin hits that primer, that amount of pressure from the primer flows into the case body and ignites that propellant evenly. And if you, more times than not, when guys are uniforming that flash hole, it's for the ultimate precision, usually bench rest rifle shooters. And if you want to do the extra step, you definitely can do it, and it definitely doesn't hurt. It's, if anything, it's going to help. And you can buy those tools. Usually it's done by hand. I think there's a couple things out there that you can do it manually, but usually it's done by hand. I just personally, for me, I usually don't uniform the flash hole. I've tried it before. You know, I've tried it doing it and not doing it. And I guess for me, I really didn't see that huge of accuracy improvement to warrant to keep on doing it. So for me personally, I just don't do it. So, um, so let's keep on going here. So yeah, it's our first piece that we're completed. We're almost finished with brass prep hell other than seating primer. So let's keep on going here. If you guys got any questions, make sure you let them rip so I can answer them here. We're only doing 20 pieces out of the 200. I'm not going to bore you to death with 200 pieces on the lineman case prep setter. A lot of times I'll just quick check the bevel, make sure you can actually physically see the bevel. You do want some flatness to the case mouth opening. You don't want it to have razor edge. I know if you get that tri-way, it does chamfer the outside and inside, and you kind of almost get a razor edge to the case mouth opening. But at least when I do this manually, I just put the slightest bevel on there so it doesn't rip the copper jacket on my bullets when I see it on them. So when, at least on the lineman case prep center, it doesn't, I mean, you want to keep it straight. It doesn't have to, I usually spin it a little bit, but when it comes to the inside chamfer, man, you got to keep this as straight as an arrow. You guys got any questions? Let them be known so I can try and answer them. We got about 15 pieces left here. Like I said, you don't want to do this, don't want to overdo this inside case mouth chamfering. You just need enough bevel on there to make sure you don't rip that copper jacket. A lot of times I'll spin this with my finger. I can kind of feel if there's any burrs on it. And if I ever prove to you guys that are new of why you don't want to do brass prep by hand, I am proving it right now. You do not want to do brass prep by hand, and I am proving it to you in these 5 parts of this series up to this point. You try and do this stuff by hand without some type of machine, your hands are going to be crippled by the end of the year. You can see I'm not doing it long on each step. We're only talking a few seconds, not much. You guys got any questions, especially on trimming or seating primers, let them rip so I can answer them. Now, this is also another reason why I don't crimp my rounds. As long as I got good neck tension, I don't crimp my rounds, regardless if it's semi-automatic or it's for a bolt action. I do not crimp my rounds because, trust me, if you're doing these steps, it definitely makes it a lot easier. you crimp the end of that brass, something you got to move that brass back. You're constantly moving it back and forth. And if you do an aggressive crimp, you can definitely feel it when you're doing this chamfering. For me personally, I know a lot of guys debate this online, whether you should crimp or not. I just don't. Now, while we're on the topic of brass length and crimping, when you crimp, if you do crimp your brass, and I actually do crimp some of my reloads, especially for hunting. Kind of explained that earlier. I think it was part 1 or part 2. I do crimp my hunting rounds with a very light kiss of a crimp. Reason why is because if I go on a hunt and I don't get anything in the hunt, I gotta, eject that round that I haven't fired, and I go next day. I go back on the hunt. I gotta reload that, and I didn't get anything. Eject that ammunition. That's why I put a little bit of a kiss of a crimp, and I just got to be minute of deer. I don't have to be, sub MOA. For me, that's really all that matters to me. So I don't really put a crimp on my brass. But when it comes to crimping is heavily, if not completely, dependent on the overall length of your brass. If you have inconsistent overall lengths to your brass, you're going to get inconsistent crimps. And if one piece of brass is shorter or longer than the next, you're going to get an inconsistent crimp. And if one piece of brass has a heavier crimp than the next piece of brass that has less crimp, that one piece of brass that has a heavier crimp is going to have higher pressures in the brass, higher velocities, and it's going to impact that paper higher downrange than the one that has less than a crimp. And for me, that's why I don't crimp my precision rounds, even for semi-automatic, just as long as I got consistent neck tension. So keep that in mind if you are crimping. So, Thor Zax, good morning, dude. I'll stay quiet. No, man, you keep on talking. It's all good. So we're almost done here. We just got 5 more pieces, and we're going to move on to seating primers. If you're just joining us, you might want to start back at the beginning, but right now we're deburring and chamfering the case mouth openings. So AR Precision saying 223 can shoot out to 500 on average. I shoot my 223s out to 600 yards all the time. I mean, consistent sub-MOA results, well under 3 inches. I think my 223 20-inch varmint bull barrel, and even my Rockford Arms 18-inch stainless steel ATH rifle consistently produces sub-MOA less than 6-inch groups at 600 yards. And I've consistently printed groups between 2 and 3 inches at 600 yards with my 223s and the reloads. And 223, the wind's going to push it around a little bit more, obviously, in comparison to a 300, a 308 or a 6.5 Creedmoor. But that's all about reading the wind, and if you do have to battle that wind, you might want to step up to a higher cartridge. But I consistently shoot mine out to 600 yards all the time, and I actually have some pictures on Facebook to prove that. So, Tom, hi everyone, nice to meet you there, Tom. Thanks for logging in. We got 4 more pieces, and we'll move on to seating primers. Yeah, the Lyman Case Prep Center is a great dual piece of machinery to have in your reloading room. It is an awesome product. You usually get about 130 bucks. Especially if you're using the world's finest trimmers, beeline it straight to this. always nice to have in your reloading bench. So we are getting close here to our 20th piece. I'm not going to bore you with all 200. Hopefully, if I haven't proven to you guys how important it is to not do brass by hand, if you're new, I think this gives you a realistic idea of how long it takes to actually reload your ammunition. I mean, obviously it doesn't take this long for me to reload because I'm blabbering the whole time here. But usually, if I was to count it all up, about 2-3 hours, you know. Anyways, let's move on to seating primers. All right, so in essence, our brass prep is done. I'll see if I can move this camera so you guys can get a better view. All right, so if you're new and you're buying your equipment, like I said, don't buy a kit. You want to part it out. One thing you definitely need to get is a primer flip tray. If you're new, this helps flip all your primers in one direction. It's got like a ribbed raised inner edge here. This is the tray, this is the lid. One quick way to, on this, they have large rifle primers and small rifle primers. I personally like to use CCI. For 223, regardless if it's semi-automatic or bolt action. Let me just grab a different set of primers here. For a semi-automatic, especially 223, if you can get the CCI 41s, you know, I was able to get these for a little bit more than what I typically buy my small rifle primers in 400. These got a little bit stiffer, stronger cup on them. So for 223 semi-automatic, I'll use the 400s no problem. I kind of like to use the 41s. They're a little bit heavier cup, heavier duty cup. It actually says for 5.56 ammunition, but it doesn't matter. 223 5.56 doesn't matter. You can notice they're a little bit different color. So these are silver, these are brass, and the reason why they use these in 5.56 is just heavier cup, less chance of slam fires, but I have no problem using either one of these in semi-automatic. And I know I've seen guys on forums like, oh, you can't use 400 in semi-automatic, and like I said, I'm not telling you how to reload or whatnot, but this, I'm just telling you how I reload. I have no problem putting these in semi-autos, and I've shot literally thousands of these without issue. So for this example, I'm actually going to stick with that. I'm going to put these 41s back in my cabinet. All right, so if there's 100 pieces in here, if you're reloading all 100, then pull the whole thing out if you're new, and then put your tray completely over it. Now in this situation, I'm not going to bore you to death with 200 pieces. I'm only doing 20 pieces here. So a quick method to just obviously count out 20 pieces. There's 10 in a row. So I'll just stick out 20 pieces, put my tray like that, and flip out 20. Now you can notice if you're new to the game, some are facing up, some are facing down. You just spin this until they're all facing in one direction. You put your lid over this, flip it over. That's why they call it primer flip tray. So they're all facing in one direction. Now, at least with a Hornady lock and load, they have different pickup tubes. They have you guys can make this out, they have a large rifle and small rifle. You can notice with the large rifle primers, obviously much larger primer. It's a lot more propellant to ignite, so the primers are obviously bigger. So Don't get those confused. Obviously, you won't be able to see it large in a small rifle primer if you try. It ain't happening. So, but anyways, we're doing small rifle here, so we're gonna use these pickup tubes. They look like chopsticks almost. I don't know if you guys can try and do that. Are you guys good at chopsticks? But we're gonna use the small rifle primer pickup tube. So we're just gonna pick these up. You can see while I was doing this, one actually flipped over. I'm just going to flip it back. So easy as that. All right, so obviously this is going to be completely dependent on what press you have. I mean, obviously I'm using a Hornady lock and load. So I got my primer pickup tube. It's loaded up with 20 primers. You can see it's got a little bit of a cotter pin here. And I'm just going to flip this around so those all go down. Now you can notice there's one stuck in there. And there is this part that I use to push this down. So that one goes all the way down. And you can see I got that like so. And you just move this to the top and pull this cottering pin, and all those will drop into your primer tube of the press itself. If I can get this cottering pin. I put this thing back in always. Can't tell you how many times I've lost this damn thing and I had to go to the hardware store and get another one. Now, at least for the top, I get this in the camera view. I like to keep this one piece of brass laying around, and that's just, I use it for weight. I like to put that on the top. This just helps push this down, the primers down into the primer seating area a little bit better. And get our 20 pieces. Now I can't stress this enough. If your press is not clean, if you don't keep this primer seating area clean, I like to personally oil mine with dry lube. I like to use Hornady dry lube to keep my press clean, and make sure you're greasing your press. But this area above the shell plate, I like to use Hornady gun cleaner and lube to make sure that this is clean, because if it's not clean, it's full of brass filings from, I don't know, crimp rims falling out and they get in there. This is not going to go smooth. So it's super important to make sure that you do this properly. Let me see if I can get a little bit better view here for you guys. Now I'm going to run the ram, and you can notice primer is just moved into its seating position to get seated into a piece of brass. So this is where uniforming that primer pocket really comes into play. If you don't uniform that primer pocket, these primers are not going to seat just below flush. So that's the name of the game. You don't want your primer sticking out of the primer pocket, and you don't want them exactly flush. You want them just ever so slightly just below flush. And the reason why is you want to make sure that that primer is completely away from that bolt face. When that bolt goes back, it strips that round off the magazine, it enters the chamber. You want to make sure that that primer is not sticking out, because if it's sticking out, you can get what's called a slam fire, and that bolt face will literally ignite that primer. And if it ignites that primer, it's going to ignite that propellant before it even enters the chamber. And that thing is going to explode, trust me. So you do not want that. That would be very bad. So make sure that those primers seat just below flush. So let's see this primer. Now, I'm not going to show you how to set up your press. Each press is different. That's where you need to read your directions. Sometimes some guys will seat their primers by hand with a primer seating tool that they do by hand. I personally, this is where the Hornady lock and load really starts to shine. I can somewhat progressively use the nature of it, and I can seat that primer, and you can notice it seats just below flush. And what I like to do is called the tabletop test. Is I'll take my piece of brass and I'll slap it down on that bench, and if it wobbles, that means my primer's sticking out too far. It's not passing that tabletop test. And this is where you really want to make sure you baby that brass. I keep on saying that, baby that brass. The second you size that brass, you got to baby that brass, because you don't want this primer your case mouth opening getting nicked. So this passes the tabletop test, and this is where, you know, you're swaging. If you don't swage that primer pocket correctly, you're going to notice right out of the gate when you try to seat that primer, it's going to be super stubborn, or it's not going to go in at all. And that's why I like to do the methods that I do. That's why I knock that primer out right away. I like to clean that primer pocket, get it swaged, get it reamed, and by the time that primer pocket goes to the second round of cleaning, those pins smoothing out that edge of the primer pocket opening even more. That's what makes seating these primers buttery smooth. So let's try another one here. Now you can see I just had a little malfunction here. So what's going on here? Well, this isn't showing off the Hornady lock and load press really well, is it? I got a little bit of a malfunction here. Sorry guys, I think I got somewhat of an issue here going on with my press. Not feeding correctly. Well, I apologize for this, guys. I'll have to figure out what's going on with my press here, but for now I'm just going to manually feed this. So it's just definitely not showing off the Hornady lock and load. The joys of reloading. So I can actually manually feed these. This will work too. All right, so we keep on checking out that tabletop test. I'll have to check out what's wrong with this primer feeding tube after the vent. It's definitely not right. Now, so one thing you definitely want to keep an eye on is for loose primer pockets, especially as you reload this ammunition. You start getting on that 4th, 5th round of fire with a semi-automatic. These primer pockets will get loose, and they'll get to the point where they're so loose that you don't feel any tension as you're running that handle, and you'll feel it through the press's handle as you're seating those primers. And when they start to get really loose, you're just going to want to trash that brass and move on. You'll see it more often with a semi-automatic, especially if you're using really hot reloads. Your primer pockets will get really loose exponentially and really fast, especially with a semi-automatic. If you got a bolt action, at least for me, it seems like they last a little bit longer for the primer pockets. They don't get as loose that quick. But if you're really pushing the extremes on your loads, you will start to see those primer pockets get loose exponentially fast. So I just wish I didn't have to do this manually, especially live. But oh well, I'll have to figure out what's going on with this primer feeding tube. I think it's got a jam in it or something. Well, actually, I think I'm just going to finish right there. I don't have to show you all 20. I'll have to figure out what's going on with my press. Something's not right. I got a feeling there might be a nick in my tube or something. I'm not sure. But anyways, I think you guys get the gist of what's going on here. Just making sure those primers seat just below flush. You're doing that tabletop test, and it's not wobbling. The primer is not sticking out of the primer pocket itself. And that's about it. So we're moving on to dropping that powder and seating those bullets. And I'll have to figure out what's going on with my press here. Something's not right. But other than that, if you got any questions, let them rip. I don't see any really questions there. Most of you guys are just making comments. And I guess in the next part, we'll be dropping powder with my dual charge masters with our pen modifications. And we'll be seating bullets. And then we're done with the live event here. And then we'll move on out to the rifle range and we'll shoot these precision loads. And I'm going to wrap this up and figure out what's going on with my press and why it's not automatically feeding primers. You know, at least you know this is a live event. So if you guys appreciate this content, if you feel like you're learning something, scratch my back. I'll keep on scratching yours by signing up to my Patreon account. And definitely make sure you keep on subscribing, liking, sharing my videos, and I'll see you in the next part.